Thanks very much for inviting me to come and talk about talk. It's always interesting to come and talk about talk, this thing that we just do, to a room full of mostly scientists of the proper kind. And I often start these talks about talk by getting you to be ready for understanding why we need a scientific approach to the thing that we just do, which is talking. So if we think about something like a black hole, which is out there to be understood by scientists, it is out there to be understood by scientists, but it's not necessarily existing to be understood by humans. So black holes are there, scientists try to understand them, okay. Talk is designed for humans, by humans, and it's something that we do. And most of the time, we just live our lives and get everything done through talking to each other. So why do we need something scientific? What I want to try and show you in the next 40 minutes or so is what you can discover if you study talk scientifically. And I think one of my sort of evolving reasons for coming and doing talks like this and the other talks that I do is to try and overturn some of the things that we think we know about talk, most of which are probably born in my home discipline of psychology, translated into pop psychology. So the things that we think we know about talk, like, isn't communication 90% body language? Don't men and women talk differently? Silence means something, that processing time or something like that. And there are lots of those myths, I would argue that they're myths around talk and how it works. So I'm going to try and show you what the payoff is for studying talk in the way that I'm going to show you that I do as a conversation analyst and other people in my field. So to start off with then, what is it that I actually do? You can think of me in a way as a bit like an academic documentary filmmaker, because what I do is collect recordings. So we start with recordings, hundreds, sometimes thousands of recordings of sometimes the same and sometimes the different types of encounters. And then I transcribe them in a lot of close, fine-grained detail, and then try to understand all of the activities that comprise any encounter from the start to the end. So if you imagine something like 100 recordings of a supermarket checkout encounter, or 3,000 recordings of patients phoning their doctors, or even 30 recordings of people doing 5-minute speed dates. All of those recordings, once you look at them sort of en masse, turn out to be comprised of a fairly systematic set of projects that people complete as they move through those activities. So I often use the analogy of a racetrack to get people to think about any encounter that we have as having an architecture to it, like a racetrack or a golf course, depending on your sporting analogy maybe. So we begin at the start of any encounter with our recipient and recipients, and then along the way, as we move around the racetrack, we complete projects of various kinds. So if you are on a first date, then you will start by introducing yourselves. You might say something about why you're here and that you've never done this before. Your friend persuaded you to come. And then there'll be something about what you do for a living. And then there'll be some stuff maybe about your relationship history. And then the bell will ring and you move on. And the speed dates that I studied, they showed me, and by translation to other people who read the work, that for a start, we're not as idiosyncratic and personality-driven as we think we are. So psychology has promoted and just made absolutely normal the idea that we say what we want to say, we do what we want to do as individuals. But it turns out, for example, that when you study, and you imagine the racetrack or the landscape of a first speed date, where people have done the introductions and they've said why they come tonight, and then at some point along the way, these daters want to know something. They want to complete a particular project, which is, what's your relationship history? They want to know the relationship history of the person that they're now talking to. And it turns out that people do that in basically one of two ways. And one of them seems to lead to almost immediate trouble in the date, and the other way is much smoother. So there are two ways of doing it. And what is so surprising is that the way of doing it, which is the most obvious way, which is asking a question, so, what's your relationship history, leads to instant trouble in the day. Whereas if you say something like, so, been married, or so, been married, or so, been married, or, which is what people do over and over again, systematically in that same way with that trail off or, it's much smoother. But if you look at something like how to have a first date, you'll be advised to stay off the topic of relationship histories altogether. But people seem to want to know what each other's relationship histories is, and it turns out that there's two ways of doing it. So if you learn nothing else from me today, if you're going out on a date and you want to know the relationship history of the other person, don't ask them directly. Just say something like, so, been married? Or, and that will just smooth you along the racetrack. Okay, so I'm going to show you now some data from different sorts of conversations to build up our sense of why it is important to have a scientific approach to this thing we just do. And I'm going to start with a telephone call, a very ordinary domestic telephone call between two friends, Hyla and Nancy. These are old technology, landline phones. It's American data. And Nancy is going to pick up the phone and say hello.
Hello?
That's it. Okay, hello. You're going to see, each time I play some data now, you're going to see a line number for the transcript and then the name of the speaker. And then what they say will come in sync with the audio. And you'll see that there are dots and dashes and squiggles in the transcript that are to do with the way talk is delivered. So there's a difference between saying, oh, and oh. And those things are important because they change what it is that you're doing with the word oh. So we have a hello and answering hello. And then Hyla comes back.
Hi.
Hi, okay. And Nancy?
Hi.
Hi. Okay, now can you see that that's a quite different type of thing, even though it's the same word, basically. Now we have a hi, which is a greeting, but also recognition. I now know who it is that I'm talking to. So what we've done, if we think about that racetrack analogy again, is we've done the greetings and identification, which tends to happen at the start of encounters. And the next thing that happens is this.
How are you?
The how are yous. How are you?
Fine, how are you?
Fine, how are you? And they tend to be done reciprocally. Okay? Just very ordinary, very recognizable. You will have done this yourself many times today, probably. Hello, hello, hi, how are you? Fine, how are you? And you do it in that reciprocal way. Now, here it comes again in one hit.
Hello? Hi. Hi. How are you? Fine, how are you?
Right. When you look at hundreds of examples of the start of telephone calls between friends, they tend to look a bit like this. They also look a bit like this if you're on Skype. This is me and my dad Skyping.
Hi, Liz. How are you?
I'm fine, thanks. How are you?
They look a bit the same if you're on Facebook Messenger, so this is a bit slower because they're typing, but anyway, here it comes. Hey, Myra, how are you? Type, type, type. Typing. Hey, you. Not too bad, thanks. So we have this reciprocal sense, and it seems to happen fairly robustly at the start of encounters. And you can see from these encounters that the people all know each other. It's displayed in what they're doing. Now I'm going to show you some science. Okay, we're going to see Dana and Gordon, who are boyfriend and girlfriend, and we'll see that there is trouble ahead for Gordon before Dana is even spoken. So we only need one turn, if you're a conversation analyst, to know that there is a problem in a relationship, which can lead to problems in one's relationships. So here comes Dana and Gordon. So Gordon's answering the phone.
Hello?
So we've got the answering the phone hello, okay? Now, the crucial thing is what happens next. If things were fine and everything was running smoothly along that racetrack, then at line 2, we'd expect Dana to do the hi back. This is what happens. So this is it's only 7/10 of a second. But to time that gap of 7/10 of a second is really important. And the first kind of debunking thing about communication is that people tend to assume that it might take a tenth, a seventh, or whatever of a second to process and produce the next turn. But when we saw Hyla and Nancy talking, there was less than a tenth of a second between their turns at talk. They were just bouncing along very quickly. So gaps between turns tell us something. It doesn't mean that the world's about to end, but it tells us that something is interestingly different about the start of this conversation compared to the ones that we've seen so far. So if I'm right and 0.7 tenths of a second is enough to know that there is trouble ahead for Gordon, we should see that in what happens next. So let's see what Dana actually does in the next turn.
Hello, where have you been all morning?
Hello. So she does the hello, which is, it's quite actually hard to resist if someone says hello to pop out the hello. But it's not just popped out in a straightforward Nancy and Hyla type way. It's been delayed. And then what we don't have is the how are you as the next thing on the racetrack. We have a question. Where have you been all morning? Now, the fact that this is a delayed question, it's not how are you, we can all recognise it as maybe a bit of a challenge to Gordon. We can see that what could happen next if Gordon was of the mind to do it is something like the start of an argument. What do you mean, where have I been all morning? We're not married, I'm not accountable to you. That could happen next. What actually happens next is really a gorgeous thing. So when people make these kinds of moves, which I call them first movers, so parents are really good first movers, like, why are you wearing that yellow scarf? It's the kind of thing that a parent would just feel entitled to say, and suddenly, and if you say, well, God, if I criticised you like that, you'd be really upset. Oh, I can't say anything right. So there are these things in the world where people go first, but then somehow, if you actually challenge them, then they are the victim of you rather than you being the victim of them. So what can you do to a first mover type of person like this? And the answer is, for Gordon here, is that he's going to recruit the racetrack. So what should happen next at the start of this encounter is the hello, the hi that we just saw between Nancy and Hyla, and this is what he does.
Hello.
Hello. I'm glad to hear from you. This is what happens next, so I'm going to just do that, which just pushes back on the challenge of the question to what should be happening now in our encounter. And only then does he answer the question. But he answers the question again with some little tiny details of production that are important. So he's going to answer the question about where he's been all morning.
I've been at a music workshop.
I've been at a music workshop is the answer to the question. But we have some other interesting features of his response. And the first one is this here. Now, we all make ums and ahs and things in our talk, in the way we produce it. And it's obvious sometimes that people are doing a search for the next thing they're going to say. But sometimes the ums have a particular quality to them that tell us something, and they're generally in the position of coming after something that was inapposite in some way, and it marks the thing that happened previously as, I wasn't expecting that to happen in this position. So we have that sound, and then a little gap of 0.6 seconds, and then a lip smack, and only then does he answer the question. So basically, Gordon is saying to Dana, I'm pushing back on your pushy question. I'm going to answer it, but I'm going to mark it as I didn't really expect that to happen now. And the next thing he does is recruit the racetrack again to do what you should do at this point in a conversation, which is ask this question.
How are you?
So he asks the how are you. If everything was now fine, you already know enough about conversation analysis to know that at line 9, what we would hope is that Dana says, fine, thanks, how are you? That's what should happen next. So the fact that 0.5 of a second happens, we should all now know that there is still trouble ahead to be managed by Gordon. And I'm hoping that what you've seen now, this is very ordinary. It's very recognisable. It's very understandable. But if you can identify moments of trouble in very mundane conversation by just analysing how long it takes for people to respond, then you can hopefully start to see why you could look at conversations that really matter and identify things that are going wrong there, which is what we're going to move on to. Okay, so 2 more examples of opening sequences. The next one is in a workplace, and this is 2 council workers, Katie Green, answering the phone to what turns out to be her friend or colleague, Debbie, who works in another part of the council. This time, I've anonymised the voices and the names of the people. They'll sound a bit strange, so I've moved the pitch of their voices. So here comes Katie Green answering the phone.
Hello, good morning, can I help you?
Hello, good morning to you, it's Debbie.
Hello, Debbie, how are you?
All right, thank you.
Okay, so Katie Green, good morning, can I help you? Hello, Katie, good morning to you, it's Debbie. So now they know who each other is. And note this bit here, these pound signs. The pound signs represent smiling voice. So you can hear when people are smiling on the telephone because you can hear that they're now smiling, and we can recognise that quality. But notice that Katie Green does not answer the phone by saying, Katie Green, good morning, can I help you? And also, Debbie doesn't respond with, hello, Katie, in that overt way either. It happens at the point where we now know who it is that we're talking to. That's quite important for the next clip that I'm going to show you. So we have the recognitions, we've got the greetings, we've got the identification, the recognition, we've got the start of a how are you, we've got the how are you, all right, thank you. What should happen next if these 2 people know each other and they have some kind of relationship is the reciprocal, how are you back, okay? Which is what's going to happen. These people are from the East Midlands, so tune your ears to sort of East Midlands, and because you'll need that to understand exactly what happens next.
Are you my duck?
Yeah, not too bad.
Are you my duck? Yeah, not too bad. Now, this is important in a way, a you meduck, because although you might never use meduck yourself, you understand that it's doing the same action. It's just that people with different languages, with different dialects, with different cultures, whatever you want to call it, might do the reciprocal how are yous using slightly different composite features of that term, but we can all recognize it as doing the same action, which is the reciprocal how are you, and then the answer, yeah, not too bad. Okay, are you all with me so far? Because I want to see if you can spot the strangest thing ever in a conversation that I recorded in the next clip, which is a cold caller. Okay, so this is why cold calls are so instantly recognizable and problematic. And we're going to see this in a very strange how are you sequence at the start of this call. So this is a call between Mark and John. They've never talked to each other before. John is calling from a business that I've called, sorry, no, Mark is calling from a business that I've called, no, it is John. John is calling from a business that I've anonymised as OCOM. And here is the start of their call. Mark is answering.
Hello, Mark speaking. How can I help?
Oh, Mark, it's John from Oak. How are you doing this morning?
Okay, so first of all, just note that the smile voice is in the first thing that comes out of the salesperson's voice. Okay? But they don't know each other. But you can then recognise partly that this person's probably been trained by probably a psychologist somewhere to answer the phone or to take turns with a smile on their voice. Because if you smile, then everybody else will be happy on the other end of the phone. Because why wouldn't that be the case? And you might have had that training yourself if you're answering the phone. Answer the phone with a smile on your voice, because that will make everybody happy. But it doesn't, and that training is brought about by people who don't understand how interaction works, because you can't do smile voice until you know who it is that you're talking to. Okay, so we've got the how are you doing this morning, before we've also had a hi of recognition as well. So let's see what happens next. A little gap, and then...
Good, thanks.
So the person being telephoned, Mark, answers the question, good, thanks. But if there was rapport, which is what the salespeople are after between these two, then we would expect Mark to reciprocate the how are you, okay? So we'd expect that after here, somewhere here, he would also say, how are you doing, back? So, you ready for the strangest thing you'll ever see in an encounter? Here it comes.
Not too bad.
So the salesperson, although he hasn't been asked how he is, says it anyway. And in these calls that me and my research assistant have been looking at between it, it's a technology company trying to sell technology to other businesses. We found far too many examples like this, which is just so strange because it's the opposite. It's doing the opposite of what the salespeople want to do, which is develop rapport. And by following the rule book about how to develop rapport, how to have small talk, then you can just immediately hear it as not genuine, not authentic. We're not ready for that kind of thing yet. And it just gets worse from here on in, so it gets a bit more uncomfortable now. So this is a salesperson phoning after Christmas and is trying to now build rapport with the potential client.
I suppose it's Christmas Eve, a distant memory.
Okay. Now, if this was going to trigger something in the potential client, then we'd expect at line 9 something like, oh, yes, or just a joining in general of the sort of small talk chat. A little silence, and then this next noise that comes out of the potential customer's mouth tells you everything you need to know. So they're not sure what to make of this conversation, and then the salesperson keeps on going.
From now, third week into Jan, was it, I suppose, the Christmas period, lots of Christmas dues for you? Was it as busy as you thought it was going to be?
We can all hear that that's quite painful. Our number one message when we went back to the sales company was to say, stop building rapport, which, of course, is just horrible news in a way, because it's what they're trained to do. It's what salespeople do at the start of telephone calls, but it doesn't work. We couldn't find any evidence that the potential client ever reciprocated or built with the salesperson that rapport. Calls were much more efficient and effective if they didn't do this and just said, I'm phoning about this, can I speak to you about why? And just get moving through the call and don't sound like you really care about this person that you've never met before in your life. Okay, so that's why it's starting to be important to understand. If you look at very mundane chat, then you can start to see the application for sales settings or whatever they might be. I'm going to show you now maybe the most serious setting that I've ever studied so far. And this is work that I'm doing currently with the Metropolitan Police, who approached me to look at the recordings that they make in the field between negotiators, police negotiators, and people who are threatening suicide. So these are very, very long, often very complex, sort of maybe 9-hour negotiations between somebody who is threatening to kill themselves and the police officer who is trying to keep them talking. And obviously keeping someone talking is good because as they keep on talking, they're not killing themselves. But what we're after is, can we find things in the keeping on talking? Can we find turns that work better than others to keep the person talking? So I want you to imagine that the suicidal person and the police officer are at the top of a spiral together, and this is life. And then at the bottom of the spiral is death. And that everything that the police officer says might move the suicidal person down the spiral, or at least not stop them going down the spiral, or that they might say things that bring them back up to life. And that's what we're currently coding the data for. So this is a first observation, a very small one, of things that we're starting to identify that work. And you will see it straight away. You'll see what works and what doesn't work. So in this particular situation that I'm going to show you, it's a woman who is locked. She's locked herself in her house. The front door is open, but let me get to know. The front door is open, that's correct, but there's a grill, a locked grill, like a security gate type thing. And so the police can see and talk to the woman, but they can't get to her because of the locked grill. And she is stood on a chair with a noose around her neck, and the police officer is trying to stop her doing the thing. So, again, I've anonymised the voices, and I'm just going to show you a very short extract, because you will understand this, I think. But the fact that we can all understand it now, after the event, is important for training later, because you don't, although we can talk and produce all the turns, we don't know what it was necessarily that created that turning point in encounter. That's my job, in a way. So here comes the police officer doing a first turn, in which he's basically asking the woman to put both feet back on the chair for a start.
And just stand, or put both feet back on the chair for a start. Just do that at least, please.
What? It's happening.
So his first request or instruction, or request to put both feet back on the chair doesn't work. So if we think about that spiral, so we've kind of maybe gone down an increment. Let's see what happens next. Silence, and then...
It doesn't have to happen yet, though, does it?
It doesn't have to happen yet, though, does it? Now, I don't know whether you'll immediately get why that is an effective term, well, that's going to turn out to be an effective thing to ask or to state. But it is effective, so this is what happens next. Basically, the negotiated with person, the suicidal person, agrees that it doesn't have to happen yet. And that's because they're not doing it yet. And so it's congruent. There's a congruence there between what the police officer is proposing and what the suicidal person is doing. So there's no threat, if you like, for the suicidal person to agree with that statement about her current status. But what happens next, you should be able to see why it's a problem.
It doesn't have to happen. It doesn't have to happen at all.
It doesn't have to happen. It doesn't have to happen at all. Can you see why that's a quite different thing to say to a suicidal person who has agreed that it doesn't have to happen yet, but to say it doesn't have to happen at all, immediately, very quickly after getting that small agreement, is too much too soon. It's like being given an inch and taking a yard. It's too fast. It's too much progress. And it's much more threatening to agree that, oh, okay, then I'm fine. That's not going to happen next in response. And indeed it doesn't.
It does.
So the first response doesn't challenge what the negotiated person is doing right now, but this one does challenge what they're on the course towards doing right now. And so what we've started to identify are what works to get that congruence between what you're proposing or asking and what the suicidal person can then easily respond to without it being a challenge to them. And this is the kind of thing that we're starting to observe. Okay. ourselves to another setting entirely. This time we're going to look at patients phoning their doctors to try and make an appointment, something that we probably all have done and felt frustrated with. So this was a study that was initiated by a group of GP practices who wanted to find out, first of all, what happens when patients phone the doctors and you know that you have this call may be recorded for training and quality purposes. Well, I might be listening to those calls. That's the kind of thing that I often do. And what they wanted was, what can we do in those initial encounters with our patients to improve probably our score on the National Patient Survey? All surgeries are rated. You can go and find out how patients rate their experience of making an appointment at their local surgery. And perhaps crucially, what can we do that doesn't cost anything? And what can we do when we know that patients won't always be able to see the doctor of their choice immediately, and we also know that they might not get an appointment immediately? So how can we basically fix all of that in a cost-free way and try to make everyone a little bit happier? Perhaps the receptionist also. How can we make the receptionist and the patients happier in that communication? So here comes an example of immediately a classic kind of encounter, and you'll see the problem straight away. It was off one of the first bits of data that we looked at, and we could immediately see the problem. We went hunting for more of things like this. So here is the receptionist answering the phone. She says, "Good morning, surgery. Kath speaking."
Good morning, surgery. Speaking. Hello, have you got an appointment for Friday afternoon or tea time, please? This Friday? Yeah, I'm sorry, we're fully booked on Friday.
Okay, now I want you to imagine an old-fashioned style telephone headset, in a comedy large version of it. And I want you to imagine that the receptionist has got the control over that comedy large telephone handset, and for her, she's now going to start to put the phone down, okay? And the only thing that the patient can do is somehow, in an equally comedy kind of way, kind of get their head underneath the handset and just keep putting stuff into the ether so that they can keep the encounter going. Because the receptionist is going to try and end the call now, and nothing has happened for the patient. So you might imagine at this point here, a receptionist, "I'm sorry, we're fully booked on Friday," that the receptionist might say something like, "Do you want me to check for next week? Or shall I have a look for the next available one?" Why wouldn't you do that? It's such a strange thing to see that this would be the end of the encounter, that the receptionist would see this as a complete transaction. So if I say to you, "Have you got the time, please?" and you say, "Yes," bye, that would be, but it's like that. And you can start to collect these everywhere. So cafes, do you have Wi-Fi? Yes, we do. Do I use the Wi-Fi? Yes. Blimey, okay, so do I need a code? So, I had that encounter in Belgium. And then New York theatre, movie theatre, the kiosks that are on the street, ask at the kiosk, "Do you have a printed timetable or schedule?" "No," head down. This kind of lack of service offering from a service provider that leaves the customer or the patient, whoever, the only thing that you can do is push back into it. And if you've ever felt like you've had to push for service, then probably what you're doing is taking the turns that the service provider could quite easily do. So let's just watch the comedy handset come down. As we get down to about here, you'll hear the patient's sort of incredulity. "I can't quite believe this is the end of the encounter." So here it comes. So the receptionist is going to reiterate that we're fully booked and then say, "Thank you," as if that's the call done.
Right. Okay. Yeah, okay.
So this is the moment, the key moment here, where the brackets indicate overlapping talk. So as the receptionist says, "Thank you," the patient is just throwing noise into the conversation to try and keep it going. And you can probably hear as well around here that the patient can't quite believe that that's the end of the call. Yeah, okay. And just throwing stuff into the conversation. And asks next, "So would it be worth me phoning the sister surgery?" She asks, rather than be offered something. Okay, here's another example, different call, different place in the call. So if you can think about that racetrack again, what we found, again, very regularly at the end of telephone calls was that the receptionist didn't summarise the thing that was going to happen next in the patient's life. The patient had to push for it. So the next time you telephone for a taxi, if people do that anymore, I don't know, you will probably recognize this sense of, I'm not happy that the encounter is over until I've had some confirmation. So you want the taxi dispatcher to say, so we're going to collect you at this time on this date from this place to this destination. So you want some confirmation, and maybe you want the email confirmation, but you want to know that although you've said all the detail of the pickup, that it's confirmed. And of course, it's exactly the same in a surgery situation, that the patients want to know, so when should I call for results? So when should I come in? So who am I seeing? And here's an example of that. We're going to start at the end of the call. You're going to hear that the receptionist thinks everything is done because she's saying, okay then, thank you. Everything surely is finished.
Okay then. Thank you.
But there we have one of these crash moments again, where the patient, as the comedy headphone comes down, the patient is throwing stuff to keep the conversation going. So it's clearly wanting something to be confirmed. Here comes the full request.
That's the 16.
The 16th at 10 past 11.
So, very straightforward thing here that's happening, that the patient just wants confirmation of the date, which the receptionist then gives. Now, it turns out that in a very straightforward, 100% perfect correlation type of way, that the more burden or effort it took for the patient to get an appointment, even if it wasn't the one that they originally asked for, but the next one, or to get the thing that's going to happen next in their lives confirmed at the end of the call, correlated completely perfectly with the scores that the surgery's got on experience of making an appointment. So basically, we saw that in some surgeries, in the first example, the receptionist would say, sorry, we're fully booked on Friday, shall I check for next week? Which is really obvious. And then at the end of the call, they would say, so you're booked in with Dr. X at this time, or so if you call us on Friday, and they would confirm the thing that should happen next to the patient. What I like about this finding and showing this kind of thing is that you've now got a basis on which to do small fixes that are very easy, they cost nothing, but they're clearly making a difference to how patients feel treated at the end of that call. They don't cost anything, and they're quite obvious. And the good practice was found within the call itself. So I don't come along as a communication person and say, I think you should say it this way. I want to find the good practice and identify it from within what people are already doing. So plenty of people are good at their jobs, but what is it that they're doing that's good? What can we find inside the interaction, inside the natural laboratory, if you like, of the recordings that I've got, that we can then tell receptionists to do? Because I suspect that if you get some psych expert in to come and talk to a GP receptionist, then the GP receptionist will be told things like, answer the phone with a smile in your voice. Hello, surgery, can I help you? Or something like that, because it sounds like if the receptionist sounds happy, then the patient will be happy as well. But we know that that is unlikely to be the thing that's going to make patients feel better on the phone. In fact, they just want quite simple service types of things. This is what I do then. So I use the evidence from things like the GP patient findings or the suicide prevention findings or the sales findings to then go back to the company or the organisation and say, you could do these small fixes that are going to make your life and your service user's life a little bit nicer. So once you have evidence of things that happen along the racetrack, you can do what I've been showing you, which is basically have people live through real encounters, anonymised encounters, of other people doing the kinds of job that they do. And what I do is I will stop it at a certain point and say, right, the patient's just asked for this. What do you do next? And see whether the receptionist can come up with a thing that would work next. And if they can, great. If they can't, then we can see an example of what works next and what doesn't work next. And then they learn from me putting things together in a strategic way so that they see the outcome of different types of turns. Okay, so I want to give you a couple of final examples of this natural laboratory that I keep referring to, the recordings that I make that are of life that is happening whether I'm there or not, which is really crucial to the way conversation analysts work. I don't want to ask you, you've just had a telephone call with your patient, or you just had an encounter with the police, how did it feel, or rate it on a scale, because it doesn't tell you what to fix. You've got to look under the bonnet, look at the engine and find out what's actually working if you want to try and fix things. So here is some examples from one of the first bits of analysis that I did, which was looking at people in neighbour disputes telephoning services to try and help them resolve their neighbour dispute. So back in the mid to late 90s, I wanted a project that was going to be timely. Psychologists hadn't really ever studied neighbour relationships before. I was kind of interested in them. And I wanted to try and capture neighbours doing things that were important to them in a way that didn't require me to say, hello, you're a neighbour, fill in a survey for me, or can you go and simulate being a neighbour over there behind a one-way mirror and I'll find out what you do in a simulation, or the ways that psychologists and social scientists very often work. I want to capture things in flight, live, talk in the wild types of ways. And the way that I came up with was to analyse people where neighbour relationships were somehow breached. And I did lots of work on what neighbour relationships are and mean. But one of the data sets that I recorded were people telephoning community mediation services to talk about their problem, and maybe the mediator would get involved and help them out. Having done the neighbours research, what I became more and more interested in was the fact that people were telephoning these services, or being telephoned by a mediator, being offered free mediation to help them solve the problem with their neighbour, and something like 2/3 of people would say no to that service. So I thought, what can I do to try and maybe help out these community mediation services that run on a shoestring? They're mostly volunteer staff. They need to get clients, because if they don't have clients, they can't justify any funding streams that they do have to keep existing as a service. So I looked at two key things on that racetrack. And one of them was, how do mediators explain what mediation is to prospective clients? And if you think about a mediation service, most of you will have never phoned one. You might never even heard of one. And if you're in a dispute with your partner or a neighbour, then you probably think, I want the law, I want them arrested, evicted, I want that, if it's my partner, if it's a family mediation situation, I want them, I want them gone, I want them divorced, whatever it might be. Humans in conflict want someone to say, you're lovely and you're horrible, you're the reasonable one, you're the horrible one. You want someone on your side who's going to advocate for you. And that might make you immediately start to realise why mediation is a hard sell, because most people phoning the mediation service said things like, hello, I've just been given this number, and you do mediation or something? So they've got no idea who it is that they're telephoning. Or they say, I've just phoned the council and they've given me your number, or I've just phoned the police and they've suggested I call you, and they tell you what they wanted, which was the council, the police, a lawyer. That's where they reached to naturally to get help with their neighbour dispute. They didn't reach for mediation. And when you're sick, you phone the doctors. There isn't a point in those telephone calls between patients and receptionists where the receptionist says, let me just tell you a bit about doctors' surgeries and what doctors do, because everyone knows that already. But because people don't know what mediation is or what mediators do, these kinds of things had to happen. So here is a mediator doing an explanation moment in the call to a prospective client.
What we do as a mediation service, we help people sort out their own differences. So we wouldn't take sides, we wouldn't try and decide who's right or wrong, but would try to help you both sort out the differences between you.
Okay, this is what mediators are trained to value, which is their impartiality, which is we don't take sides, we don't judge, we don't have the authority to do things to people, we want to facilitate a conversation, we want you to help you sort out yourselves. That's the pitch. Now, somebody who's never heard of mediation before and has a next door that they hate and they want someone to say they are horrible and you're lovely, you can probably already start to see that it's unlikely at line 8 in our natural laboratory that you're going to get a turn. There's a slot now, but what's going to be that slot going to be filled with? Is it going to be oh, what a relief, I've been waiting for this kind of service for the last 5 years? Or are they going to do something else? They could do even, might be something, but this is what happens. Okay, if 0.7 seconds is a doomed relationship, then 2.5 seconds is total communication breakdown fail. So let's see what happens at 9.
Well, to be quite honest, I don't think she'd cooperate.
Any turns that start with that much delay and with a well, and then some more stuff here, it doesn't really matter what happens next. You kind of know that didn't work. So in the natural laboratory, if you look at then hundreds of instances of mediators explaining their service to prospective clients, whether it's successful or not, this is in the next turn. It's in what happens next. It's right there. We can all hear it. We can all hear that this isn't a resounding success. And it turned out that the mediators generally explain mediation in one of two ways, either as their ideology, their ethos, or they might explain a process. So first this happens, and then this happens, and then this happens, and then this happens. And perhaps unsurprisingly now, process-based explanations were much more successful in getting people to agree to mediate. But if mediators did their thing, their committed passion as an explanation, it didn't get clients. And then the reason why I ended up talking to the Ministry of Justice and the US equivalent about promoting mediation was that the promotional messages that mediators tend to have on their websites are also things like, we don't take sides, we're impartial, isn't that amazing, wonderful? And we know that that doesn't attract clients. So we can start to, again, very, very quickly and very easily say to mediators, stop explaining mediation that way, do it this way. No one's born with a natural tendency to explain mediation one way or the other. They can unlearn the thing that they've been doing quite easily and just do something else, and it's going to be more effective. Here's my final example, and this is one word that can change the whole trajectory of an encounter. So, and it turns out it works in lots of different situations as well, beyond the one that we're going to see here, which is the mediators, again, at least initially. So imagine now we're at the end of the racetrack, and the mediator has explained what mediation is, and now is going to ask the question to try and see whether or not this person on the end of the call is going to become my client today on this call, yes or no. The answer to whether or not they did anything successful is inside that call. So here is the mediator asking the question.
Does that sound like it might be helpful to you?
So I've just explained mediation. Does it sound like it might be helpful? There's that 0.7 seconds again. You already know that the answer to that then is no, it doesn't sound helpful. People don't just go no, because that's not the way humans do turn downs. We do it in a way that looks more like this.
It might be, but I'm not too sure at this stage about, how long seeing this girl at all.
So this is a terribly elaborate response to a yes-no question. This is a yes-no question. This is another one that just as a quick insert, this idea of closed and open questions and so on. It's a complete myth that somehow a yes-no question is only going to provide a slot for a yes-no answer, because as we can see here, when asked a yes-no question that you don't really want to do a no straightforwardly to, it takes quite a long time to say no. And you can all hear that that's the beginning of a turn down. Now, this isn't surprising that the caller again says something a bit like we heard before, which is, well, I don't really think she'd cooperate. Well, I don't really want to see this girl. They start to invoke the negative character of the other party, which is completely consistent for the caller because I'm lovely and they're horrible. I'm the nice one, she's the horrible one. And when I can say that, I will say it. So here, does it sound like it might be horrible? Well, I'm the nice one, but she's the horrible one. And that's going to be the key to getting this person to say yes. So we've gone from basically all of that, which is no, to the most resounding yes turnaround from maybe 10 words that the mediator brings out of her mouth next. And I want you to watch the point at which the caller starts to respond, because the caller will respond to what the mediator does next before the mediator has even finished it. And that's the clue as to what is going to work next. So watch out for the overlapping talk where the caller comes back in and see how far the mediator's got saying what she says next that seems to be causing this dramatic turnaround.
Yeah, but you'd be willing to see two of our mediators just to talk about it all?
Yeah, definitely.
So the mediator, yeah, but you'd be willing to see two of our... That's as far as she's got before the caller says, oh, of course, yeah, definitely. What the mediator has done here is open up a slot for the caller to do what this mediator no callers want to do, which is to say, I'm nice. I'm the nice one. But you'd be willing to do, yeah, I'm the willing one. She's the kind of person who won't. But that means you must be the kind of person who will. And so this isn't a question, it's a statement from the mediator about the kind of person that you must be. So although the mediator can't say, I can tell you're lovely, and your neighbour's a cow, she can say, but you're the kind of person and the caller resoundingly, very quickly, before even really being asked what it is she's been willing to do, is absolutely the willing one. So having sort of picked this out of the massive recorded data and sort of found this gorgeous thread, I then thought, can I find any more like this? Does it work anywhere else?
I'm sure he would be willing to come in and see our mediator.
Oh yeah, I could find them.
I just wanted to see if you would be willing to attend a session as well.
I'm more than happy to go down that route.
Here's a call to family mediation, I think, next. So I looked at other types of mediation settings.
Is that something that you would be willing to do?
I would be willing to do it, yeah.
That's great.
Just do anything just to try and get the thing done, you know.
Okay, here's someone who sounds very reluctant.
My brother went to his divorce and he says he found the mediation a waste of time and made me right just to not get on.
It's not sounding hopeful that this person's ever going to agree to mediate. A little bit later, though.
Would you be willing to come in to see our mediator for a chat?
Know what's coming, which is...
Yeah, I will.
Here's a business to business. I've got 2 more clips to show you and then I'm done. Business to business now. Business person 1 trying to get business person 2 to do a rather tedious sounding mail experiment. And the reason that I'm showing you this clip in particular is because we often think, again, you know, you need a really nice voice on the telephone, or it's those skills that are more important. And we're just so unaware of how much grammar and words push us around. This person's got a terrible telephone voice, but nevertheless gets where she needs to get to using willing.
So for us to do this, we're asking businesses in your area if you'd be willing to send and receive 2 to 4 items of test mail on a weekly basis.
Okay, so, you know, not the best telephone voice, but nevertheless, would you do that?
Okay.
Yeah, I'll do that, not a problem. And finally, this is why. So we found that sometimes mediators would ask the other party if they are interested in mediating. Okay, so here's an example of, are you interested?
Is that something that you'd be interested in here?
Yeah, I mean, I'm interested. I'm trying to get everything sorted out, but in the meantime, it's been responding too quick or so.
Okay, so we get a yes, but, and then we move into something else. So can you see that although interested might get people to say yes, but it doesn't give them an opportunity to say, I'm nice, I'm the willing one, I'm the good one, in the same way that willing does. Saying, yes, I'm interested is not the same, yes, I'm willing.
So, would you like to make a referral?
Okay, asking someone if they would like to mediate or some combination of that. Here's the answer. Not. And here may be why, the sort of clue as to why this is all working. If you didn't already have this sense, I like to have some empirical evidence for the sense that it's because I was always the willing one. And here's some evidence for that.
So, from what I've told you, does that sound something that you want to find out more about and you're willing to try?
I was never not willing to try, which kind of tells us what we need to know. All right, so if we change words, we change outcomes. Willing does work to get people to do things, perhaps, that they are resisting in certain sorts of situations. If you can understand why asking your partner if they're willing to put the bins out isn't the right place to use that, unless they haven't done it for 5 years and you've been trying and trying and trying, then you might ask them if they're willing. But it works best in certain situations where the response gives someone the opportunity to sort of say, I'm nice. So if you're in marital strife for a long time and you say, would you be willing to go to relate? Then you might get uptake because that's a place where any party is going to want to say, I'm nice.